This should be a relatively quick video. I just want to go over what we called growing up a cornbread casserole, but in reality it's kind of just like an enhanced cornbread recipe. For historical sake, I am not making the cornbread from scratch, although I plan on experimenting on a video to do that. We're just using these corn muffin mixes. That's what we used growing up, and go from there. So to start, you just follow the basic recipe on the box. It is just the mix, an egg, and a third of a cup of milk. Now what we'll be adding to this is pepper jack cheese and just whole kernel corn. I usually do 2 of these for one batch of this cornbread. And because we're adding some additional things to the cornbread mix, I usually add an additional egg to help bind it together. So instead of just the 2 eggs that it calls for, I would use 3. I had somebody ask about how I crack eggs. Typically you can crack them against the side of the bowl, and then pull them open with your hand. I use my middle finger, the knuckle here, and the bone to just hit and get a nice clean, usually gives you a decent clean crack that you can then pull apart. Works pretty well. If you get practice hitting it against the bowl, you can do that. See, this one did not break nearly as nice. The eggshells vary in thickness, and so how much force you need to use to get a break varies. That's why I don't like doing them against the side of the bowl, because I don't want to risk getting eggshells in what I'm working in. And I find that if I break them with my knuckle, I am less likely to get those eggshells into the batter or whatever I'm working. Now, the third cup of milk. Whenever I use milk in a recipe that I'm baking, I will always use whole milk. It's just because the fat content is higher, and a higher fat content in baked goods always gives you a more rich end result. So while you may use less, like a 1% or 2% for your cereal or something, I'd recommend, if you're baking, to use a higher fat milk. Even if you only have to buy just enough to do what you're doing, it's fine. Just kind of mix this together. Now I have done it before where I've added the cheese and the corn to the dry ingredients of the mix, but what I found is this mix with the flour and cornmeal in it, it's good to get it worked a little bit before you add everything in, just so there's a little bit of gluten buildup for binding. I have a paper towel here so I can... And beyond this point I probably won't whisk it, but I'll leave that there just in case. So depending on how much of the straight corn you want in the recipe, you can either do 1 can or 2 cans of corn. I'll probably just do 1 of these. It's a 15-ounce can of corn. Now if you open the can so that there's a little bit left, what you can do is you can hold this down with your finger and just pour the liquid out of the can. You don't want too much of this. It'll thin the batter. But this is good enough. And then the weight of the corn will push this out enough that you can grab it and bend it out of the way. So there is our corn. I'm just going to fold it in here. Now you can add other things into this. You can add like crumbled bacon if you want. You can add cut up green onion. Just keep in mind, the more things that you add to this batter, the less capable it's going to be of binding everything together. And it will kind of just fall apart on you when you go to cut it and serve it. If you don't mind it like kind of flaking apart, that's fine then. If you want to add more things, I'd probably recommend another egg. That can help keep things kind of together. Now this is a 1 pound 16 ounce block of cheese. And I'm probably going to use about half of it for this recipe. You can just grate this straight in. You'll use the spatula to work it in once it's all done. You can just get. I'm alternating and kind of doing this at an angle because I don't want super long pieces of cheese. I want kind of somewhat shorter ones, and varying this, I'm doing it against this surface, so I kind of get a varied, little shorter version. While I can still hold the entire block for stabilization as I'm grating it. It's just because I want enough batter between the pieces of cheese so that I don't have like a big pocket that's gonna melt and break the consistency of the cornmeal. And as you get to this point, if you get pieces that flake off into chunks, that's okay. You don't need it to actually be perfectly shredded. You just need it to be small enough that you can cover it in batter and get it into a pan. Once you get about this small, it's going to start breaking apart pretty quickly. I'm going to leave that chunk in there and hopefully that'll be fine. This is the amount of cheese that I've got. I'm just going to fold it in to the batter that I have. Now I'm going to put this into just a pan. You could always put these into muffin tins with liners if you want to. I do like cutting the large amount of bread better than that, so that's what I'm going to do. Now this amount of batter is going to make about the same size that we did the stuffing in, the 8x8 Pyrex pan. But since that is currently still in use, I'm going to use these two bread pans. You could use something like this Pyrex 9.5 inch pie shell. It would work pretty well. It would rise decently, but if you tried to cut it crisscross, you'd get different pieces. You could cut it like you would a pie, and that would probably work pretty well. But I do like cutting this into squares a little bit better than cutting it into triangles. So what I'm going to do is going to evenly divide this between these pans. It is not important that I fill up the pan entirely, just that I get about the same amount in each so that they bake at about the same rate. I could probably get this all in one. I'm going to try to do this all in one pan just because it looks like there's not as much extra as I thought there would be. So, it looks like there's enough clearance here. So you have to expect that it's going to rise, and you don't want it to rise and spill over. You want it to, as it rises, be solid enough that if it does rise past the edge of the pan, that it's going to stay in one shape and not spill out of sight. So we'll go with this and see how we do. And usually bake this at 350 in the oven until you can insert a toothpick and it comes out clean. I'm going to start it at about 40 minutes and see where it's at that point. So I've pulled it from the oven. It's nice and brown. Insert toothpick. Comes out clean. Now for this, if you're baking in a bread pan like this, or even in a smaller pan, a shallower pan, you can take a butter knife and kind of go around the edge like this. This will help make sure that it's not stuck to your pan. If you have a non-stick pan, it works pretty well. If you don't have a non-stick pan, I might recommend flouring the pan before. If you're cooking in a pan like this, you can just cut across. Now be careful if you're with a non-stick pan not to score, press too hard with a knife if you're doing this in the pan. You don't want to scratch up the nonstick coating. Once that's there, you don't have to work to get it out. This is a lot easier on a shallower pan, but you can see when I pull out a piece of the cornbread. It's a good variation on traditional cornbread. The addition of the extra egg, as well as the corn and the cheese helps keep it a lot more moist than a normal cornbread. And there you have it.